Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Bytes. Thank you for joining us. My name is Declan. I am the Training Program Coordinator at ETC, based in the London office. And if this is your first Bytes, welcome. Thank you very much. Bytes is a session that takes place on the first Friday of every month, and it's really just informal chats. We just get a bunch of industry experts together, and we just chat about light and lighting, really. And this week, we're talking about creative collaborations, particularly in respect to lighting and projection design, because those two worlds probably have to work quite closely together, not to take anything away from the other creatives at all. But that relationship is probably really super important. So we've got some fantastic people joining us on the panel today. Thank you very much for being here. We've got Mark Jonathan, John Driscoll, Hayley Egan, and Katie Pitt. So I'm going to go around one by one and let you just introduce yourself, say a little about who you are, what you do, and just for fun, let us know what your favorite flavor of ice cream is. Katie, since you're centered on my screen at the moment, I'll start with you.
Okay, hello, my name's Katie. I am an EOS programmer, and I am also I have done in the past Catalyst and D3. So I do a bit of lighting and a bit of video. And my favourite flavour of ice cream is, it's a hard question. We love a cornetto in our house after a meal. So it's a bit predictable, but yeah.
Cool. Thank you very much. Marco, I'll come to you next.
Salted caramel, I think, or the water ice. I'm a lighting designer of all sorts of things: plays, operas, musicals, ballet, dance, ice, and I have done juggling. And as some of you know, it was where I coined the phrase "light is balls," the ones in the air, because of course we had to get the light to go 5 meters above the head of the juggler. And some of my work is with projection designers and some is without, depending on what's been decided.
Brilliant, thank you very much. John, you're next on my screen. I'll come to you.
Is it me?
It is.
Okay, sorry. Yes, I'm a projection designer. Been enjoying a small break in my career for the last 16 months, which has been very beneficial to archiving things. But no, I think I started off as a lighting designer. The first thing I studied was theatre design back at Croydon, and then worked as a lighting designer for a long time. Had a aspiration though, when I first chose what I was going to do in a theatre design course, I thought I want to do cinematography. So I'll work towards doing that, getting a place when I'm a bit older. And luckily, I did manage to retrain as a cinematographer. And then after that process and a while of working in film and trying all sorts of different techniques, I got all of those skills of lighting design and cinematography and filmmaking together and became a projection designer. So nowadays, most of my work is as a projection designer and producing content for theatre or live events. And that's me.
And your ice cream. What's your?
I'm very fond of coffee ice cream.
Oh, you and me both. Thank you, Hayley.
Hello. So I work in video design. I suppose I'm sort of an early career video designer. I do a lot of associate work at the moment for mostly Will Duke, if anyone knows him. And I kind of got into it through, I studied film at university. I didn't go to drama school or anything. I knew nothing about the world of lighting either, and still have a lot to learn. And I sort of fell into video design through meeting a video designer and going, oh wow, that looks really fun. I did a bit of theatre and I did a bit of film, and it just all sort of, the overlap was really enjoyable. So that's sort of how I fell into it. Can I be rogue and say I don't really like ice cream?
Oh, scandalous.
So unacceptable.
Scandalous.
Ouch. But if I had to choose, it'd probably be mint chocolate.
Oh, that's very specific. Brilliant. Fair enough. Good. Well, thank you all for joining us. So yeah, I mainly sort of wanted to get everyone around the table because, technology's moved on. Projection is becoming, firstly, more prevalent in all the shows we do, but it's also over the years with technology changes become more affordable, which is making it sort of tend to pop up more and more. I mean, when I first started, going back a couple of years now, it was, and we were having the chat before the session started, it was large format Pani projection and carousel projectors. And so it's come a long way. So it's really, and a lot of that stuff, because it was so expensive, was out of the reach of most places except for the big opera houses and those kind of guys who had that sort of budget. So as things have changed, it's really interesting to see this new generation of creative joining the team sort of more regularly. So I just really just wanted to have a chat about how that works for all of us. I'm a bit of an anomaly, perhaps, in that I tend to do lighting and projection design. The word control freak has been used, but that's just sort of me. But I'm always interested in how everyone else sort of works together. So I'm going to kick this off with a question out to everyone. So you're appointed, you're on a show. How early in the process, firstly, are you brought in? Are you sort of there from the get-go with the set designers? Do you come in sort of at the last minute? And then what sort of conversations are you having with the lighting designers through the sort of rehearsal process? So it's quite a sort of broad question. I accept that. But just to sort of overview what your sort of process is on that. And I'm going to pick on John again first, because you're sort of on my screen.
Okay. Well, the answer that I want to give you that isn't necessarily the reality is that you want to be involved from the very, very beginning. From the conception of a set design, you want to be part of that sort of genesis, that idea that we're going to do something that's multimedia perhaps, and it's got things built into it. But I'm afraid to say that is not for me, that's never always been the reality. I could sort of say maybe 50% of the projects were, where I was sat at the table at the very beginning, and then the other 50%, I came in a couple of weeks before the thing's going onto the stage, and made it work. But, I don't think there is a perfect scenario, because some of the ones where you come in at the last minute, or, have a very short journey to something being on stage, turn out to be absolutely fantastic. And you just somehow, all of the ingredients come together. But ideally, there's a few projects that I did in my career where we were doing workshops before any design was ever on the in the white card, and it was, let's make these interactive film / action sequences work first of all, and then we'll look at what we need and we'll then put that into the set. So that's the most creative and the most effective way of working as a projection designer for me. So that would be my answer so early on. And it's also, you've got to find those relationships with designers where they're willing to do that. It's not always, you're saying a bit of a control freak thing. Well, design, as in set design, it's not so much that, it's just that, suddenly becoming a collaborator in designing your environment with someone like me, it's quite a generous thing to do. It's suddenly where you're sure about, I saw this as a black wall with texture on it. Suddenly you're sort of saying, well, for it to work, I'm sort of seeing it as a mid-grey wall without too much texture on it. You know what I mean? So it's a hard thing to gauge, how much you can do. But ideally, it's nice to be involved. It's nice to be invited early on, and then you can try and get everything right. That would be my answer. Is that enough, Declan?
Sorry, I was on mute, nodding furiously while trying to get to the mute button. Mark, how about you? We've chatted before about when the sort of lighting designer comes into the project, but how important are the conversations with yourself and the projection designer early on?
Well, they're really important. And I agree with John. I don't know if it's 50-50, but too often I arrive and I'm presented with the finished design, set design. And then we've got to try and fit the projection and the lighting into the design. And I think that's the funniest thing. I mean, we're used to that in a lighting way, I suppose. But has the designer thought about the projection throws or where you can put the projectors? You folk who do projection have done some crazy things where I've thought, this is impossible. You can't possibly project on that surface. And John, you found a way of getting the light to go around the corners and get onto surfaces. I was wondering, did you get much? Well, how early were you brought on Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, one of your award-winning productions?
Well, that's probably the one I referred to. Like we were doing it years in advance. Let's meet up in a studio and get some dancers and edit stuff and make it work and show it to a few important people. It was years in advance. So. Yeah, it worries me a bit that sometimes I think something like that is very, very rare, But I know collaboration is much, much better now. But I think the thing is with the technology, we can react quickly in video now, which our Achilles heel for a long time was we couldn't do things very, very fast. Wouldn't you say, Hayley? Would you agree about the, computer processing and stuff like that is, I've got I've started, I'm working on SSD drives and things like that, little things that have come along where you can very quickly, almost real time, make an adjustment to video design now. And I'm talking about the post-production side. So I'm talking about the actual footage that goes in. So do you need a lot of prep? Yes, you still do, because that's where the creativity comes from for us. It comes out of the studio, really. And the other thing is, if we haven't done that prep and that development, it's dead in the water. We can't be effective in the tech, because it's any tech. I don't really know. I don't think there ever is a tech that's not ruthless, and hard. And we're doing this now. You've got to be there. It's all got to be in the bag, and Katie, we've pre-programmed it, haven't we? It's all got to be ready to go, because people have got such short attention spans in the tech these days that, if you don't deliver in the moment, you've missed the opportunity, and you won't get another chance for another 2 weeks after you've done the preview. So, it's tricky. It's a balance. You need a certain amount of prep for survival, really.
I don't want to jump where you're going to with this, Declan, but of course it always amuses me when you are on board and you look at the schedule and you go, well, have they made any allowance for the extra technology that we're putting into this production? Is there any quiet or dark video time? Or is it, we'll just do it with the lighting and there's not much time anyway?
Well, we'll do it overnight. That's the one.
Yeah.
We'll just do the video overnight, because...
Or in the tea break.
So we don't need tea breaks or sleep.
So for you, Katie, how is that? If you're on a show that's got both lighting and projection, does that change your approach to your prep time?
I'm not sure it necessarily does. It adds to it in that, whether I'm doing lighting or video, the first thing you want to do is get in touch with your opposite number and talk to them about how you're going to interact. But it's, when I get employed for a show, really varies a lot. And it depends on I think it more depends on which designer I'm working for and kind of what capacity I'm working for them in, because each designer that I work for, obviously as a programmer, you take a slightly different role, I guess, depending on who the designer is you're working for. So some like you to be very involved in their process from the beginning, and some you're coming in slightly later on. And of course, depending on when the designers have been employed themselves, you're coming in with them. But I don't think I wouldn't say it needs particularly much more time to organise collaboration if there's lighting and video on a show from a programmer, but you've got to make sure you have a conversation. And the conversation can be 15 minutes long. It can be really quick. So you say, oh, hello, I hear I'm doing video on this show. I hear you're doing lighting. I would like to be triggered by OSC, MIDI, or whatever. I would like to control projectors from the lighting desk or something. There's only a few things you need to discuss, but it's really important that they get discussed. And actually, when you slightly leaning onto a slightly different point, I guess, is when things really fall down and get stuck in fit up and tech is when you haven't had that little bit of collaboration beforehand, where people say, right, we're going to talk to you like this, and we're going to talk to you back like this using these protocols. And it doesn't, like, that little bit of collaboration is so important. But actually, I think it's so important in all shows nowadays, more and more. Like, it just makes everything easier if people talk beforehand in every angle of a show, So, yeah.
It's quite good though, Katie, isn't it? Because I mean, the one amazing thing is what you can do now is pre-visualize so much in video, which is just staggeringly incredible, I think. I mean, I still can't believe the 3D environment, working in 3D environments and seeing that, and then seeing it connected to the console. And that method is, if you've got the opportunity to do that, is just amazing. I find I just almost can't believe that we can do that. And so on the one hand, time's got shorter and compressed, and our expectations have got bigger and bigger and bigger. But thank goodness there are some, there is that ability to pre-visualize.
Yeah, I think what seems to be happening from a technology point of view is that you're right, there's less time sort of during the tech period, but actually prep time like that is becoming more and more and more and easier to do. So actually, if you're doing video or if you're doing lighting, you're turning up to a tech and you've plotted the whole show in a previs, almost always, like nowadays on bigger shows. That's standard. And then you come in and you put it together. And actually, for the show that I'm doing lighting in September, we've already put together in D3, I mean, a very clever man called Sam, mostly not B, but we already previs lighting and video together in D3, which is the next step, and that's phenomenal. And that's sort of the height of collaboration, when you can do the prep like that from the outset, and that's helpful to everyone. It's fantastic.
And are you short of time? Is that why you've done it, or are you just really curious to see how it all works together? What's the
It's just sort of, it's more of a, the more you can get done, we're not any shorter of time than in any other production, but the more you can get done beforehand, then I think the more creative you can be during tech.
Yeah.
Because you've got all this work behind you. You're not trying to catch up on what you decided to do in rehearsals. You've done that. You're looking at that, and then you can start making your changes. So actually, I think it gives the designer a freer time to go, oh, okay, well, I've looked at this straight away because I've already prevised it. Therefore, I've got this little bit of time to change that already in tech, rather than spending the tech putting together the initial look to start with. So if you've got the opportunity to do that, then I think it's worth taking. Although it takes a bit of coordination, but yeah, it's definitely worth it.
The tricky thing, but as a designer, it's a bit tricky sometimes, we find, because of course we've never, in the way things run, in the limited time that we're given, and it doesn't tend to get factored in that we might need to pre-program it, which again shortens your post-production, because you've got to achieve that a week before, you've got to be applying all the footage, getting it all put into the 3D environment. So, you know, it's good if everything's running really well on a timeline, but if you're everything's getting pushed closer and closer to the fit up, it becomes a little bit problematic. It's
I guess do you guys designers find that, experience that? I guess there's that difference between being a video designer and being a lighting designer, in that the lighting designer is sitting rehearsals and doing a rig, but actually the video designer is making the content before the tech, whereas in a way the lighting designer is making the content during the tech. It's sort of, there's a different weighting of time for you guys to put your designs together. I don't know if either party sort of feels like the time isn't really allowed for that, or
Hayley, do you
I think that would be it would be ideal a lot of the time to be able to pre-make content. John, I don't know if you found this, but maybe it's just the shows I've worked on. Often where we're at in the making of the show, there's still huge gaps of unknown, and we won't know until we've teched it and we see everything on stage in the state that it's supposed to be. And there's lots of chopping and changing, and only then does the director or the designer go, that's what it should be. Now I see it. So yes, to a certain extent, there's a lot that can be pre-made, and like everyone said, those early conversations are so important to gather the references and to start, you know, setting up your project files or whatever. But maybe it's just me, but actually a lot of content creation doesn't really start happening until tech. Until we're starting to see.
Not just serious. I find that as well. You know, I mean, and something quite often I'm putting filmed aspects in. You know, I'm sure you're doing the same thing, Ellie. And what always seems to be a recurring theme is that you'll be on a project and you'll, you know, the whole thing's been. It's predetermined that it's going to have all this footage in, right, Hayley? And you'll be like, you know, and then at this bit we're going to have this sequence with all the actors in, all this sort of thing. And I don't know, you go to the first production meeting, week one, and it's all like, we're going to do it on this date, 2 weeks time. Mm-hmm. Give you plenty of time to edit it, won't it? And then I can guarantee that, you know, that date will just then bounce to the next week, and then the day before the tech starts. Because we've lost the rehearsal room that day, so we can go to a studio, and so in our VR world we want it to be like the way Katie says, but then there's like all this pressure comes at the same time. It's really
I don't think I've worked on a show that has been able to be pre-made, and we just slot everything into tech, and it's all programmed, it's all great. I don't think that's ever happened. There's a lot of, like you say, John, like guerrilla last-minute filmmaking, like, who's available? We don't have a green screen. Let's just like find the nearest black cloth or white wall or like make it happen. Lots of that filming, as someone mentioned earlier, like the cost of things going down. Certainly in video, like being able to, you know, film things on a mobile phone and a very lightweight tripod now that you can, you know, get off the internet, things like that have made things so much more flexible in terms of making things on the fly. And I guess it's made everything a bit more accessible, but it's also meant that you can make things in incredibly short notice, which is great, but it can get quite stressful.
Yeah. You've all kind of sort of hinted at having to do stuff at quite short notice. And I mean, this is something that I know from a lighting design point of view is true in that, and Mark, I'm sure you're the same, but when you're planning your rigs, you tend to put a few little extra things in as your sort of get out of jail free cards, or you know that you've got, you know, a bunch of movers in the rig that'll probably hit that spot or give you a different gobo if you need it, etc., etc. Yeah. So firstly, are there things that if you know you're going into a show with projection that you make sure are in your lighting rig that are your sort of get out of jail free cards? And then I've got a second part of that question that I'll bounce across to John and Hayley about what you could do as your get out of jail free cards.
Okay. Can we have a bit more time for that?
Absolutely. I'll chat to Mark in a bit. What do you think about that one?
Mark. Yeah.
Did you say me?
Yeah.
Sorry, you broke up then. Yeah, look, the get out of jail card is essential, and the way things have changed. I remember when I was a young lighting designer, and I had 3 specials, and I said to the director, "Listen, you can have 3 specials, and I need to know in advance where you want to have them." And then you would take a punt because you had to hand your rig in so far ahead. Carmen is going to get killed in the centre of the stage, I reckon. And so you'd put a special in there for the death of Carmen. So the advent of the moving light has changed all of that. Being able to, Carmen can die wherever you like now because we can get her, and we can get her in whatever tone of colour we like. We don't have to plan that either. When we thought it was great when the scroller came out, except that I remember my associate at the time rapping my knuckles and saying, the hire company needs to have your scroll. We're going into fit up in 2 days' time. You haven't done the scroll. And you then scratched your head about what colour to have. So now to be able to put the light wherever you want it and dial up the colour has made a big difference to us. Of course, we have to respond very quickly, and that puts a lot of pressure on the programmers to put it there quickly and efficiently and accurately. I hanker for more catch-up time, that techs aren't 3-session days. There's a whole movement now anyway that we should be parent friendly. So that just means that the programmers and the designers have to be child free, which I know they're not. But gosh, I was happy when I did a parent-friendly musical where the actors all said they were going home to feed the children, but actually went down the pub as far as I could see. But it meant that me and the programmer could program in quietness and with plenty of time in the evening. What isn't allowed for in all of that is where we're going to have more time is that we get more money to do it in. And that's a wind-up. We already know that we have a wind-up with programmers not getting enough setup time. And the thing that has always completely intrigued me is how the video designers know how much time they need to make the content. Because I sit in on some of those meetings and I go, oh yeah, is that one little projection or is that 500 projections in this show? And how do you know? How do you cost that in advance? I've asked a question.
Okay. We can help answer that if you're interested.
Yeah, please do.
Oh no, what now?
Yeah.
I was trying to give you a bit more time before you get out of jail.
Concentrating on the question in hand.
Sorry, do that one first, and we'll come back to the budget one.
Get out of jail, you.
Get out of jail. Let's start there.
Okay, who's next?
Haley, come on, you're on my screen at the moment.
Good.
Well, I think for me, I just like to have options, really. If I know there's a scene where, there's a bit of video content and we've spoken in rehearsals about what that could be, and I know I have to go out and shoot something, rather than just getting into my head that, oh, this is the shot we're going to use, I'll shoot things and just make sure there's options so that, we can all sit together and kind of not scroll through, but look through what works best for the scene and the tone of everything. And then, if it's animation or if it's something a bit more textural, then, get the color wheel out and just cycle through colors, try and match the lighting. I guess options really, and being flexible to change the idea and not to just get into my head that this is what it should look like, and I won't turn up to tech dead certain that this is the bit of content we'll use, because I know that it will change, and just having some things in my back pocket to pull out when we need it.
John, how about you? What's your get out of jail card?
I'm glad I had time to think about it, because I remembered a good, well, I think it's a fun one, but there was for ages, like, I yearned for Catalyst, and that came along, and when it came along, it had this thing called the moving mirror, which High End had developed with it was a moving mirror that was on the front of the projector, so it made a moving light of a projector. It was a moving light equivalent with a projector moving image. So I always thought they were great, and I saw them and I loved them, but I could never afford one at that stage in my career. But then they came up with this thing called the DL1. Do you remember that, anyone? No one does, maybe Declan does. But look at it, it's great. It was I think it was a sharp, it was a projector in a moving, it was a moving projector that looked like a moving light. And I persisted with them, and I took a few shows to different parts of the world with them, and people thought I was completely mad, but it was brilliant. It was absolutely great. That was my go-to thing when you had an element of, like, we're not sure what this is, this design. It would allow me to be really creative and fill in the gaps and actually move an image from one part of a set to another. It was really useful. When they did do a thing called a DL2, right? And it got better, and the server got built into it and stuff. It was all very specialized. We carried on with that for a bit, but then I'll just say that when we got to a point where the projectors were looking really, the standalone projectors were looking much better than those. The quality of the images and the brightness. And then at that point, it was still, I managed to get Alan Cox, who I work with a lot, to design me something that we called the Orbomatic, which was, it was a projector put in a yoke, somebody else's yoke that we bought, and we used to put the projector in the yoke. And then that was like the bee's knees. That was it for me. We'd reached the pinnacle of our technology. So we used those on Ghost. We used to move, rather than having like projectors set up all over the circle, because we wanted video projecting on people, we used to just reposition this thing. You know, it would sort of, like Meccano sort of thing, would move it to another part of the stage. But it worked brilliant. You know, it was brilliant. So that was something that I sort of still would really love. And I'm sure there probably is stuff. And there were other types. There was a Barco one that was about as big as a car, and I couldn't ever really use. That, you know, it's sort of treating, it's a telephoto projector that projects video. You know what I mean? And that was really, really useful, and was sometimes my get out of what's it card. And then nowadays, the get out of jail card is a big hard drive. It's at the bottom of your bag, and you kind of go, well, I'm really stuck now. Get that old Firewire 800 drive out, and we'll start looking at all the stuff we've shot over the past 25 years. Some of it's still PAL, but it may look okay. That's my get out. That's my get out.
A good one, actually. Having a stock image, your own personal stock image library.
Yeah, and you like, literally, you're like, you may be abroad or somewhere, and that happens, and you're like, if this doesn't start up after 8 years, I'm really in trouble, and I'm going to go home because I've got no other option. So you know, it's so I like to joke about it, but you know, it's things like that, isn't it? Hey, you just have to improvise a bit, you know, through ideas which happen in a tech quite often. You know.
Yeah. I don't know about you, but the amount of times like ocean waves are wanted.
Oh yeah.
And skies and clouds. So I just have hours of this footage.
I don't know. I would do that, Mother Nature, to be honest with you. I'd probably just, that would be it. I wouldn't, you know, atmospherics and things like that are just such a rich thing that we've got in, like, particularly in theatre design, cycloramas and stuff. It's lucky, actually. You know, if the weather wasn't very interesting, we'd struggle a bit, I think, you know. Yeah, It's tricky there, isn't it, Hayley? Sometimes Mark's actually got a really great thing that he taught me, which you referred to in lighting, Mark, and when you just say, well, look, let's move on. Let's just move on. Let me think about that overnight. And I've always thought that's a good one. It's sometimes you can get very caught in something.
Yeah. I think it's okay to kind of put a placeholder up and go, well, this is what we're thinking.
Yeah.
And then if there's enough time, like for instance, I've just come off a show actually, and there was a lot of sort of filmed footage in it. And a lot of it was, we couldn't find the language until we were seeing it on stage. So and as you know, like trying to organise a film shoot, there's a lot of planning, you've got to get people involved and time frames and stuff. So you don't really want to be filming something that's completely the wrong thing, because then you've wasted everyone's time. So it will be placeholders for a while until you're all agreed, like, that's what we need now. And then you kind of got to shoehorn some time into, your day off. Literally on the Sunday after the tech, I was, round a friend's house doing some filming. Like I'd come in on the Monday with it, but then you've got it, and then it's the right thing after we've all had a bit of time to think about it.
Can I add to the placeholder thing? My other sort of get out of jail thing that I have always subscribed to for decades is that I always go into tech with a cue list, with a cue synopsis. Mm-hmm. And Hayley and I, we worked together on 3 operas very intensely, where we merged that whole cue synopsis idea. And although you might not have known which image you were going to use, and I might have known quite what the lighting was going to be, we knew that at this point in the music we were going to do something. Mm-hmm. Having that framework really, I felt, was a massive get out of jail thing, because we absolutely had, the whole thing was numbered, and all you had to do was go up and find the right images when they weren't right or whatever, and I had to find the right lighting. But at least we knew that's where it was going, and we discussed that with the director. We put the cues in the score, and we were able to work really fast because we had that language existing between all the programmers and designers. I can see you nodding in agreement there, Katie.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, actually, talking about shared cue lists and shared cue numbers, because that's been such a key factor for me as a programmer in how lighting and video collaborate, is that if you guys have the same numbers, then everything works better. And I guess, how do you guys as designers feel about, because that actually takes quite a lot of work together before you go into tech, doesn't it, to put that together and to pull your ideas? But do you guys, from my point of view, it's always fantastic, but do you guys feel like that as well? Does it help the creative process, or can it be a bit restricting?
I recommend a very long train journey, don't you, Hayley?
Yes.
We were back for the weekend from Cardiff. We put the whole thing together on the train with the director. It was great. We knew we had a limited amount of time to have that cue meeting, but my goodness, it stood us in good stead. The only time when on one of those operas I got my fingers burnt was that, Hayley, you were expected to flash things up on certain words in the dialogue. I'm talking about Fidelio. And suddenly, because we had found that quite often where I was doing a lighting cue, you were doing a projection cue, and for a scene. But here you were doing stabs on specific words, and suddenly I found there were 20 projection cues between each lighting cue, and then it was a little trickier, because I couldn't just say update on my lighting. I had to make sure we updated 20 cues ago around all your wordplay. But that was, I felt, was slightly fingers burnt on that one, but otherwise it worked really well.
Yeah. And do you know what, Mark? I haven't done that since, but it was such a great way of working. Like it enabled us to just get through text so fast, because there wasn't time. There wouldn't have been time if we hadn't have done all that prep work in our, on the train journey, in the breakfast coffee before tech started. Yeah, there's a lot of
I did wonder because you were in that classic world of I'm still got to find content and stuff. So I became what I thought was the number keeper. I was in charge of the numbers, the queue numbers, and occasionally I'd light the show as well. It's not only that time, I did a production with 59 productions where I was the number keeper for projection, sound and lighting. I don't know if that's my controller aspect that I need to know, where is this queue happening and what is its number? But I certainly feel there's a concrete something to hang cues on if we've got that structure already.
Yeah.
Yeah. Does anyone use Google Sheets and collaborative like Excel spreadsheets or whatever you might use, sheets on Apple?
Yeah.
Sharing queue numbers between.
Yeah, I've done it a few times. We've done it a few times on shows.
I've had a lot of success with that.
Yeah, it's fine as long as you've not got dodgy Wi-Fi.
Yes, that's very true.
Sheets and the Wi-Fi in Buxton kept crashing, and each time it crashed, we sort of had to save the cue sheet quickly. And oh dear, I wasn't overly happy about that. But
I think what I found from using shared queue numbers is it's usually, because there are usually more lighting cues, it's usually the lighting designer who sort of sets out to start with, these are what I think the queue numbers should be. And then the projection designer comes in and goes, oh, so I think we need a queue there, and 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 then it gets accommodated. But then actually what's really fantastic from my point of view is that in tech, it's really the programmers who keep that going and keep that line of communication going. And I think that's really fantastic, that sort of collaboration between those two departments via the programmers, where you're saying, as a projection programmer, you're saying, oh, on cams, oh, by the way, we need a queue here, and then I'll just pop it in my queue list, and I'll just pop it in my queue list, and you're keeping an eye out for that and making sure it all works between you. And that I think is a really nice way to keep in touch with other departments. From my point of view, anyway.
And from a programming point of view, since we're there at the moment, I mean, I remember walking into venues where they were doing tech, and the video would be on its own console, and it happened to be a Hog 3 at the time, because I know that was fairly popular in video world for a while. And then lighting was on its own console, and I know that technology's moved and things have sort of merged. How, generally speaking, would you work? Would you have one console and you're talking to everyone? Are they separate consoles and then you merge queue lists and show files? What's the sort of, is there a standard? What's your preferred method?
I mean, it's very difficult to know if there's a standard, because of course, as other programmers will know, as a programmer, you always work alone. So actually, I never work with other video programmers, so I don't really know what they do. So it's difficult to know what the standard is, but it's really evolved since I started doing video programming on Catalyst, 8 years ago, maybe. And it's a very different thing to what I do now. So we started on Catalyst. We did sort of the first 2 shows with different queue numbers and then merged the show file on Preview 2. And that was just the worst idea anyone's ever had to do with editing. You've got to start on the same show file to start with. But with Catalyst, of course, it's much more involved. It was always much more involved because the Catalyst interface itself is not very conducive to doing a tech, because it can be quite clunky and tricky to program quickly. So when I was programming Catalyst, I was doing it all on the EOS, and it was much more integrated. So there was a lot more video information on the EOS than there is now that I'm using D3, because D3 is much easier to program in a tech, and from the EOS you're just sending cue triggers. Basically, you might be, I don't know, controlling a fader or something, or a fader's controlling something on D3, or you might have a couple of sort of things for the operator to control. But you're basically just sending cue triggers, but it's always on the same. So the EOS side of things is always all on the same show file, which when I've been using Catalyst, it gets a bit more tricky because the lighting lighting do their prep, and then they'll sort of send your show file over to you, and you do your prep, or you'll do your prep separately, and then you merge when you get into the theatre. Or there's no sort of best way to do it. But I think the take-home message for me is always do it as soon as possible. Like, do it as soon as you get into the theatre, because if you're merging on preview 2, then who knows what's going to happen. You don't want that surprise. That's not going to be good. And also, your queue numbers might not match and stuff. But yeah, certainly now that I use D3, it's a lot more. So you're programming on D3 and you're just triggering queues off the EOS. So you have a Nomad or an Ion or something, but actually, which is on the lighting network. But actually, most of your work's being done on D3. So it's slightly less invasive, I guess, of the lighting show file.
Thank you. And again, while we're staying in programming world, we just had a question come in from Karina. Thank you for that. So the question to the panel is, which program do you use, I assume, for video playback? Is it mostly QLab? I guess it's largely scale of production dependent. But also, which programs are you using to edit content? What's your sort of default content creation software and then playback software? I don't know who I'm going to pick on first. I'll pick on Haley because you've got a big fat smile there. So you're it.
Programming. Yeah, scale of show. It just so much depends on the scale and the budget of the show. I suppose the shows that I've done where I'm the video designer, it'll all be on QLab because it's so accessible and it's cheap, and actually it really works for video. At least I find it's done everything I needed it to do. Although saying that, actually it doesn't do if you're used to D3, I've associated on some big operas and it's always D3, and it's just the sort of layout of D3 is just so easy, and it really makes things quicker to work with, because you can do a lot of, I guess similar to Catalyst, actually, you can do a lot of effects that QLab can't do. So if the director's like, oh, can we see this, see a change, it's really easy to do that in something like D3 or Catalyst instantaneously. But saying that, I don't know, John, have you ever used NDI into QLab?
No.
So an amazing programmer, Dan Trenchard, put it on my laptop. I think you just download it from NDI New Tech, I think it's called. And I had some real success in my last tech using QLab. I had NDI on my laptop, and we were on the same network as my programmer, Ellie Thompson, who is amazing also. I just have to say that. And she could just kind of get a live feed of my After Effects composition panel. So if I had the content up just in my project and my composition,
you could put it up on the
you could instantly see all the changes live, which was really useful. And of course, it's not rendered, so it's not.
Yeah, but you can get a grade on an image.
Yeah. Or you can add in any of the many effects that you can't get in QLab, for instance, and just see.
Yeah, no, that saves you a lot of time.
Yeah, it was really, really useful.
So is that is it work through a network? Is it a network type?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
That's great.
But it's great. It's really good. I'd highly recommend. And then in terms of content creation, I do everything in Adobe, really. Usually After Effects, but sometimes I'm like chopping up content in Premiere. If you have to make animation, it usually depends on the type of animation, but you might make it in Photoshop first and then export all the layers into After Effects, and then you'll animate it in there. So they all sort of merge together as a package. So
it's Creative Cloud.
Yeah,
really,
yeah,
absolutely. I wanted to bounce back into lighting world for a sec. That's actually both worlds here, actually. And just talk about color for a second, because obviously that's super important to all of us. And Mark, you've touched on, having the ability these days to do subtle shifts in color and things that, weren't always easy to do previously. So who needs to shift color first? Does projection content go up and lighting goes, oh, that's what it looks like, I'll adjust my colors? Or do you find yourself in situations where lighting goes, that's kind of the blue I want, is there something you can do on the projection to match? And is it, what's that sort of process?
I'm never afraid to color correct things, and because like on a screen everything's just wonderful, but in any sort of design environment you've got contamination from bounce, from so all the contrast generally in stuff that we make for stage presentation. The first thing that goes in an image is the contrast, because you get this bounce light which gets into the blacks of the image. So suddenly it becomes a low contrast image. So I just look straight away at the contrast. And the other thing is, it's not just do we color correct the video imagery to the lighting. It's like, do we color correct it because it's on a slightly strange surface? Do you know what I mean? So I don't wait to be asked, basically. That's what I'm saying, Declan. I would be just like, I accept these are parameters of working on stage, and I just get to work. And I've worked, some because I'm very fussy about it, some programmers just say, look, go on, John, just get on with it, and I'll take over the console and do it. And maybe I don't know if my eyes are any good. I might be seeing it completely wrong, but I just have an instinctive thing is to want to bring two worlds together. But working with lighting designers as well, though, there might be times though where it's unavoidable, and there might be the difference, the shift between the projected imagery and the lighting is just too far, and they won't meet. And then that's when there might be a conversation. I wouldn't. It depending on who I was working with, like with Mark, I would say, Mark, can you just bring that? Can you bring that CTB a little bit towards 201 from 202, and that will come together? And I don't think he'd be offended. But sometimes there will be a
say it, though, would you? You probably wouldn't have to say it because I would have already have done it.
Yeah, that's true. I just think it is really important. You can't have the two things. I mean, another really common one is you end up with working with some sort of LED screen technology, for instance, okay? And that's stuck at the back of a stage, and it's set up in, say, daylight or something like that. It's set up in a daylight color temperature. And you see that there should have been and then suddenly the two designers, the lighting and the projection designer, will find that they set off on a journey where they really can't, it might be a predominantly 3,200 degree Kelvin rig or something, a warm rig, and a 6,000 degree Kelvin light box at the back, and they'll be too far apart. And that's an occasion when you would just drive yourself absolutely mad trying to get those two things to marry up. So it just comes with a bit of it. I think what I'm trying to say is, like, when you set up the design as well, you've got to set it up right so that things are complementing each other.
And I think it's important not to forget the other things. You mentioned the surface, which can suddenly catch you out when you project on this wretched surface, because it's not the same as seeing it on the screen.
Purple. It's got purple. It's a purple screen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing is what the actor of the Soprano suddenly comes in wearing, and you go, oh, right, because the stage lighting has to make that costume work, and sometimes we have to respond to that.
Yeah.
I shall never forget, though, John, right back in those early days, we were all working quite separately. You were going to produce projections on Parney.
Mm-hmm.
I was using, I don't know if moving lights have been invented then. I'm going back to the 90s in Bath for a show that was going to tour. And we had a set design, and we all chose the same shade of blue without really talking to each other.
Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? You know, like it's good. The thing is, that's a good example when things do come together. But you see, I'm sure you've been on things, Hayley, right, where there's something they're not joined together, and I think trying to achieve that's really tricky sometimes.
So are there conversations that either do happen or that you think need to be had quite early on about the base color temperature of the world that you're going to be in? Because if, you know, certainly at the lower end of scales, a lot of the venues may well still be running on tungsten rigs. Not everybody has the budget or the means to shift into LED where you have that color point that you can shift.
Yeah.
And I guess you need to know that going in, because if you create, exactly what you said, if you create your content on sitting on your screens that are set to daylight, calibrated to daylight, and all of a sudden you're in this tungsten world, there's not a lot you can do, really.
Well, the amazing thing about all of this is that we're on consoles, and we've got color mixing, and actually there is actually so much you can do to that content. And I got over it because after a while, because you can be I don't know, Hayley, right? I'm a bit of a purist when it comes to, like, this is what the image is, you know, like this is how I filmed it. But like, it's also like the Q numbers, like, you know, I always do a synopsis, it starts at 1, it ends at the end, and there's no gaps. But then when you're doing it to a lighting design, it looks like, you know, it's complete, you know, it's Q1.1, then we go to Q10, and then, you know, it's one of those things that with experience, I think you start to realize. The thing is, in theatre, when you sit in an audience, you look at a stage, and if it's got screens or multimedia in it, your eye just loses all reference, and its color temperature is just like, you're going to send it all over the place all night, and you can stop working in preset values, and you can just liberate yourself and go, no, I do need to tweak this image to work with this sort of sepia tone, or I need to go much bluer because the lighting's very cold. I think it's something you have to, well, I had to get over it, but, you know, I'm fine about it now. You've got to make things, complement each other, for sure.
And I guess technology has probably helped that, because you know, the LED gives the lighting people a chance to adjust anything, and I suppose the software platforms that you guys use for playback and content creation allow you to adjust for most things. So it's probably less of an issue. You know, I'm sort of hark back to the old Parney and carousel days. Once you'd made that slide and had it printed. You were kind of okay. You could put a bit of gel in front of the Parney, of course, to do some correction, but you were limited.
No, you really were. You really were. And I think what you did is put a piece of color correction on the Parney to try and shape the whole show the way you wanted it, you know, because that was daylight most of the time. So, I don't think it's if you're doing a job well, Declan, I don't think it's a big deal. I think there's a lot to be said about contrast in our imagery, though. Contrast is, like, really important. But do you think, hey, do you find you adjust the contrast a lot, Hayley, in your stuff?
Yeah. I mean, I've recently just been working with TV monitors, and they're so bright, and the image is just so different. And, you know, there was no time in the schedule for us to just sit in front of these televisions and just go through all of the options and all of the hundreds of settings in, you know, deep hidden away in these monitors. So all of that does have to end up being in the adjusting the color correction.
Yeah.
But something that I did do that was really lovely, it felt like lighting and video teamwork, that we did not long ago, was the lighting designer sent me a screenshot of the Lee filters, whichever Lee filter color she was using. She sent me a screenshot of the color that was online. I don't know the website. I'm sure you all do. And that meant I was able to just drag that color into my After Effects and just color pick it straight away. So like instantly, the bit of text animation was the exact color of the lighting gel that she was using. And it was so simple, but it looked so good together. It was so effective and so satisfying when everything just gels. No, that
Another
was
fabulous top tip from the Bytes team. Yeah, absolutely. No, it does, and it is about having those conversations. It hadn't occurred to me just to sort of send, sort of digital gel swatches backwards and forwards. But I guess to a certain extent, that's kind of where everything is shifting with lighting becoming more digital. I use that in a very loose sense, but you could argue that LED is a kind of sort of digital light in terms of what we're able to do with it. And I guess that it's starting to match the world you work in a lot closer. How have you found, Mark? I'll come to you. If you know that a show is going to be heavily projected, does that sort of concern you at all? Is there any sort of flags that go up, or you just going, yep, no, we know where we're at, and we'll just go for it? I'm sorry, I'm phrasing that question badly. Which are there elements of a projection heavy design that would concern you? Is it surfaces? Is it content? What are the conversations you want to have with people to sort of make sure that you're armed?
What surfaces are you projecting on? What surfaces have I therefore got to keep light off? How will the performers be interacting around or on or within those surfaces? A very recent example would be the new Wiltucket Ballet for Birmingham Royal Ballet, L'Azur Sky, which was Nina Dunn did the projection. I didn't see it live, but I watched the replay. For as far as I could see, a lot of the illumination of the performers was being done by the video, which is a new opportunity that exists. But my key thing is, where are the projectors going to be? Oh, so you don't want me to put any lights in the middle of the advanced bar or the number one bar or the backlight bar because you're going to have a projector there. And how do I light it and not trash the projection?
Yeah.
What opportunities has the designer had given me to light it so that I can do that? And of course, when you have a wonderful design team that works together, it's fantastic. I was amused on a fairly recent, just before COVID production, where I had some holes cut in the set that when other bits of scenery were in front, we'd open the flap and I could do some big shadows. I gave one of those convenient holes up to projection because they suddenly needed also to do projection through there. So it's those conversations about who's going to have which bit of space, I think, are really important.
Yes, that happens. It always happens, doesn't it? Yeah, you can get to get designed out of a show as well, and you come along. There's just no options. It's so hard to find the nodal point of where a projector needs to be. Finding that place, it's very hard sometimes.
I always bow to that that's where you have to put your projector and we have to fit the lights around it. And then we've also got to fit around the speakers.
So it's very important to have a shared Vectorworks plan.
Yeah.
Another thing that's good to talk about beforehand. Otherwise you get sort of a panicked product or product designer sort of 2 days before fit up, who's just suddenly looked at the projection Vectorworks and the lighting Vectorworks and gone, oh, some of these things are in exactly the same place.
And also when you've masked the show on plan, in the elevation of the plan, with getting your lights out of view, and then there's an enormous projector, what used to be an enormous projector. I always think it's good to have looked at all of that before the fit-up.
Indeed. The fit-up's not the time to be having those conversations.
It sadly so often is, though. That's the problem. It was made mention of lighting people with projection. John, I think you mentioned that, you sort of were lighting people.
Yeah.
How do you find the quality of light coming out of a projector in terms of dealing with skin tones and things like that? How does that sort of play into it?
Well, I was certainly fussy about it because I used to compare it to the quality of a spotlight. So that's why at a certain point in time, we developed our own homemade thing that had a much better light engine and had a much better contrast ratio. Basically it had a better chip in it. But like the Sharp projector that it used to be, like, no, I love Sharp, like, don't get me wrong, they make great stuff and all that, but at the time it had a little bit of a green tinge because that LCD technology sort of had a milky green sort of thing, and to someone who didn't have a discerning eye, like everyone on this thing, everyone watching today would know what I'm talking about. It may not have mattered, but to me it irritated me, and so the quality wasn't as good as a beautiful spotlight. You know what I mean? That's what you're getting at, Declan, right? But I don't think now we would be limited if there was such a product. The difference is, I think, with what we're doing, what I was doing is that was a focused, concentrated video. It was like a spotlight and very narrow. It was like a 19-degree source 4 with video. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. A lot of the video designs, contemporary dance designs, are actually a window within windows moving around a much bigger, more powerful projector. So I suppose it's a different thing. What's unforgivable, though, is if you start to see pixels, and that's not much fun. But the technology will just keep making that, keep improving that. It's awfully flat, though, isn't it? That's the other problem. The flatness of it is a tricky thing. It's an effect that you don't, you'd rather not have it. So I quite like the idea of dynamic projectors that change shape and stuff, and you could do it like that. But
yeah, I guess that's the beauty of tungsten, is it is inherently a three-dimensional source, because of its beam and its field, whereas a projector is designed to be exactly the opposite of that. It's designed to be perfectly flat. I mean, does that mean then that you would design beam and field angles into the content, so you would have a hotter center with faded out towards the edges? Is that one way to deal with it?
You could do that, but they could all be applied as preset looks, like you do with GoBos. You know what I mean? You could have all of that built in. But whether it had aberration or something, maybe it stretches. It's all sorts of things that you could think about to make it more of a human type thing. But that could all be in the content, couldn't it? It could all be the thing. But I mean, look, it's such a, like, as a projection designer, you struggle because I'll spend days obsessing about the quality of the lighting for something I'm filming. I'm originating. I want that to be tungsten. I want it to be a key light here, and I want it to be here. I want it to evoke this time period. It wants to look like it's in the 1940s. So it will be very stylized, high contrast, all that sort of thing. And then I lose control when I put it into the theatre environment. Do you know what I mean? It's a tough thing. It's those things we have to get our brains around. It's kind of full of contradictions in a way, but much of design isn't it? I think, the reality of what you have to do to get it to bring across the message is tricky. So I've not been negative about that, but I look, don't get me wrong, I love the quality of light, and I still use, I'm fanatical about film cameras and
I see a beautiful projector sitting there in the background that I'm most jealous about.
But the reason I love that is I just love that quality of celluloid and the light fall off and that sort of stuff. So I think what I'm saying is, I would aspire for a moving projector fixture that had all of those. I don't think there's even ever been a discussion about what it would be. It's always been something else, just converted. So it'd be wonderful to develop something like that, because I'm sure it would be really interesting. So and it would just be a beautiful projector.
Well, I'll make sure our R&D team watch this on playback just to plant that seed.
It would be an artist's machine, I would say.
Yeah, that would absolutely.
And it wouldn't have the server built into it.
You have Bluetooth these days, of course, that'd be the advantage.
Well, there was one terrible occasion when something broke and I had to go up a telescope and plug a USB key into one once, because it was the only way of updating the content, so,
Fair enough.
Anyway. Sorry about that. It was a ramble, really, wasn't it?
No, it's perfect.
There you go.
We also chatted a little bit about LED screens as as a new sort of source.
Aren't they bright?
They are. Well, this is exactly where my question's going. Is have you, Marco, ever had to do a show where you've had LED screens as the projection surface that are kicking off all this light? Because they really become another light source. And what's your approach? How do you really? It's
well, it's been a while, but I do remember. I think they were pretty new, and we had them in Los Angeles at the opera there. And, I just had to say, turn it down, darker, darker, darker. And it was a bit like star cloth. At 8 or 10%, it's wonderful, and full up, the star cloth has no magic, and I felt that was a little bit like that with the LED screen in a theatre. I mean, when you're in a very big event space or outdoors, that's another world. Hard to have enough light to match it, I'd say.
Mm-hmm.
I think
very hard to retain the magic that we were trying to create.
I think the other thing about the LED screen is you can't turn it off because it looks horrible when you shine a light on it and it's off. So you have to fly a cloth in front of it or something. Or
they're the right. There's the right application for them for sure. I mean, I love working with them, but we have to spend a lot of time taming the beast. Really, it's like how much work to put into making it more like a living, breathing light box rather than a pixel array. Do you know what I mean? That's what I think the secret is. And whenever I always like to ask like the tech, I always like to say at the end of the process, so what level is the LED at in the end? And it's normally at like 2% or something. Which is a problem in itself because when you drive those things so low, they don't fade very nicely, and so but I'll just say one thing about it as well. Sorry to go on, but it's really tempting, and it's a really for design. It's like this could be the solution to all our problems. This is just such a tempting, if we could just do this, it'd be amazing. But if you've ever experienced eye fatigue from LEDs, well, you probably have. They can be too present on the performance. That's something that you can sort of find out by accident. Like with that whole being bombarded by so much LED radiation is quite a thing. So. Yeah,
it's also tricky because if you've got a BP screen, you can always drop a gauze in front of it or something to sort of soften that, but you can't do that with an LED screen because it introduces moire and all sorts of horrible things.
Well, in fact, that's what we kind of do. We do a lot of processes like that to actually, but that takes a lot of R&D so you don't have the moire. You don't have the shocking psychedelic moment where you kind of go, this is a mistake, wasn't it? I don't know. I absolutely love them, but just in the right place. You can do the most wonderful stuff with them.
I think the big factor for me there is you touched on it with the intensity, because you end up running them so low in theatre. It's getting decent color rendering, I suppose, out of them starts becoming problematic, as well as your fade. Well,
there's a way around that now, which do you remember, Katie, which is it? Is it 16 or 8-bit? No, it can't be 8-bit. Is it 10-bit we run them at, or 16-bit color space? I
I can't remember. It must be. I think it was 10. Was it 10?
I think it might be. I don't know. Somebody will know in the conversation, but that's handy to get those curves back because lighting professionals are connoisseurs of dimmer curves, right? And if you're a projection designer, there's just nothing more dispiriting than seeing the most terrible curve, like fade out, And I'll just say, that's why I was so massively motivated back in the earlier days of projectors to say to manufacturers, can we just have what we used to have on the Pani projectors, which was an old-fashioned grayscale shutter device built into projectors? And it came along at one point, and it was amazing, and then it went away again, and then now it's back with ArtNet, so it can talk straight to the consoles. There's nothing that's just like, I'm actually surprised that we're allowed, such a small niche industry is allowed that privilege of function. It's the most useful tool is the optical fade for us, because seeing anything that's less than if a light fades out gracefully and then a video fades out like I don't know like just dreadfully, it's just awful. You just feel like you've let the side down. So
and you always had when you used to do fades before that, of course, you always had the video fade, and then you had like the snap out of the shutter on the video black at the end as well.
Yeah,
which was, if you're in a blackout, you could never time it quite right because you were sending, I can't remember what kind of string, which only worked sort of 80% of the time anyway. And
we could spend half the tech programming trying to get the shutter to come in.
Yeah.
At that point. Yeah, I know, it was just abysmal, really. I mean, we're lucky it actually had that shutter in it, to be honest. But before that, we used to put scrollers on the front, and things like that, and menus used to come up, and I don't want to replace lamp now.
I think it's a really interesting thing about in general about doing video in theatre as opposed to lighting is that because lighting's been such an integral part of theatre for such a long time. Yeah. When you program lighting, everything you use is bespoke to the theatre industry. So like your lighting desk is made to do theatre on, and your dimmers are made to do theatre on, and your lights are made to do theatre on. And actually it's a really interesting point that it's definitely getting much better in video. But theatre is such a niche industry that the equipment you're using for video, it's not made for theatre, which is why there are all of these things you have to sort of correct because, the big projection companies aren't, or very rarely are sort of going, oh, this is an industry with no money. Why don't we make some bespoke products for them that work well? Or the same with sort of LED screen manufacturers, or D3's making a real effort to try and make their platform work in text, but it's always been the case as well when you're programming video that sort of the media server will do everything you want it to do, but it takes you 10 minutes. And it's always been difficult to make people understand that you don't have 10 minutes, you have 3 seconds, and the director's shouting at you, and the DSM's moving on. And, I know that your media server does this, but it's got to do it right now. That sort of usability has only just started being introduced into video in theatre because it's quite a new industry. So you have all these sort of hurdles to overcome because of that, as well as sort of delivering the design.
Absolutely, yeah. You're reminded about how much of a niche industry it is sometimes because, I look at some of the people I work with, who specify systems, and going back to that question earlier on about what do you use, well, I always just think, well, there isn't ever I don't have an answer for that. My answer is a case by case basis because if you've got if you go to a venue where there is something, then you'll work with the something. But if you're building a show from the ground up and it's complex, it becomes a bit of a chess game of like, well, will that work with that and that work with that? And if we go for that, we'll be able to spend more money on that. It's a real art to you have to audition. Oh, it sounds boring, but I always like to just think, well, what's going to be best? Is what's going to be reliable, quick, and have the parameters that we need and work with all the different pieces you know, what meshes it together. And I'm not necessarily the best qualified person to decide either. You know, it's a conversation with Katie. It's a conversation with, you know, all the people in the team to make it all work together. Because you can get great big incompatibilities, right, with all of our equipment. You know,
and depending on the designer as well. Like I've spoken to a lot of designers that prefer to, they know what they want to make in a certain program. Either it's D3 or is it Catalyst or is it Isabella or even QLab. Like, I don't know, there's certain softwares can do certain things, so they want to make it in that software.
Yeah, if you compare it to like, they're not quite doing the same function, but if you compare it to lighting desks, actually lighting desks sort of all work in a similar way. If you look at the ES or you look at the MA or you look at the HOG, yeah, okay, the interfaces are slightly different on them and some of them do slightly different things, but they're all, like a lot of the stuff they do is the same. Whereas if you look at the different media servers, they are completely different. Like the interface is different, how they, you know, how you make your projector hit a surface is different, how they're so disparate that actually it's very difficult to, when you're making a decision between one or the other, you're making a really big decision that's going to affect everything you do during your show.
Yeah.
And I think it will be where I'm at in my life, but often I don't have the choice. Like it's what we're given.
Yeah.
So you just got to work with what you've got, really.
But that's the same, you know, like when you're lighting, you know, you'll come across a venue where there's an exotic sort of, you know, lighting board that you've never come across before, and I'm sure that's happened to you all the time, hasn't it, Mark? You know,
It's a very polite way of putting it.
you know, that it will be something rare, and you've got to get your head around, how does this thing work? You know, it's really difficult sometimes. So Hayley, I'll be like, I know what you mean. I normally find that in the opera world, they've invested in something, and you kind of go, it's going to be that, you know, it's going to be that one. But then you've got to start working out, how do you get the footage into that format? How do you do that? You know.
Yeah. I did an R&D recently where they wanted to use Hippo because they had one in house, and I'd never used it. So you've got to then learn a new language because it's a new way of working.
Yeah, no, it's quite a learning curve sometimes, and you know, it's hard though because you've got to know all of these different systems and have different ways of doing it, you know, and getting the footage on there, and if you're feeling a bit insecure about that, you know, like if you've not done it, it can be a bit nerve-wracking getting it all formatted. It's quite tricky sometimes. So yeah. I think you just have to be prepared to put some effort into learning them, I guess, you know.
It's one of the things, I guess. I mean, I've always sort of thought it about lighting, is that lighting for me is a lovely fusion between the art and the science, because you have to understand light, but, you know, you have to have a sort of sense of the art as well. And I think arguably in projection world, there's a greater knowledge required at either end because of the shooting, you know, the ability to record content, to make content, but then also to understand all the technical stuff to be able to do things with that content is huge. I mean, are there sort of resources available that people can, you know, is there a sort of favorite website that you can go and go, is it like projectorsorus.com? Is that sort of, you know, default? So what I'm driving at is there a hub of information that you use that, you know, we can pass on to other people who may need this information? Or is it just hours and hours of trawling through the internet and finding the answers you need? Oh, me the question.
What do you think, John?
I was just wondering if Katie, isn't there a video programmers hub? Isn't there video playback from Facebook one?
I don't know. They haven't told me if there is. I'm not on Facebook, so that's very kind of helpful. I don't know. I just kind of, I expect there are. I mean, there are things like even the ETC forums. You can still sort of go slightly off piece and discuss ETC in relation to video in terms of programming. But so I think things that I find out sort of just come from doing shows and interacting with people, and just networking with people as you would normally, and having a chat with them. So I don't think there's anywhere specific that I go, but maybe other people can suggest somewhere that's more productive. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say that the forums are generally a good sort of place to start at any rate, and usually if there is a hub, someone on the forum will probably then bounce you off in the right direction.
Yeah, there'll be someone. Lots of people are sort of video and lighting people and are looking at that and can answer questions, so it's a good place to start.
Fair enough. I mean, one of my favorite quotes is Gene Rosenthal, who said that lighting designers create the air that the actors breathe. And I think, as beautiful as that is, I think it's absolutely extended into projection design world, because the degree of collaboration between lighting and projection design for me is one. We're all creating the same world, I think. So it's been really, really interesting talking to you and hearing how it all sort of works and how it all slots together. So, on that quote, I'm going to bring the session to an end. So thank you very much, Hayley, John, Mark, Katie, for joining us tonight. Really appreciate you giving up your time, taking part of Light Bytes. It's really appreciated. And for everyone who joined us, thank you very much. Our next session is on July the 2nd. Again, it'll be 4:30. I did put the link to our website up in the chat, etcconnect.com/lightbytes. You can sign up. You'll see what the next topics are, who the next panelists are, and we'll keep you all informed. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. Just as we wrap off, I do this every time, and it always stumps people, but I've got a few other things to say, so I'll give you a chance to think about it. One last sort of top tip that we can leave people with, or hint, anything like that. I'll give you a few seconds to think about that before I sort of come around and surprise you. Just to say to everyone that these sessions are recorded and they are available on our Study Hall channel. They're all there for playback. If you pop onto YouTube, Google Study Hall, there's a Light Bytes playlist. They're all available. This one will be there too. It normally takes us about a week or so to get it all edited and popped up there. But yeah, feel free to share the word. The more people that know about the sessions, the more of them we can do, and the more varied they can be. So thank you very much for attending. And on that, I'm going to start with you, Marco, unfortunately, because you're sort of next on my screen. Top tip for everyone to close off with.
Plan and communicate.
Brilliant. Short and sweet. Thank you very much. John, how about you?
Oh, crikey. I'm not quite ready for this, but I think, yeah, always get a synopsis early on. Analyze the script and just get all of the bits that you need to produce in a list. And then that's something to start, you can start to unfold it, what it's going to be, and work to that, so you won't get into a panic too late in the process.
Brilliant. Hayley, bounce back to you.
I think something that's helping me is to just not be afraid to just try it. Just throw it up on stage and see what it looks like. If it doesn't work, it's fine. You can always take it down. just try something.
Oh, thank you. And Katie, we'll end off with you.
I don't know. I guess my top tip would be like Mark said, just communication is always the key. For the show I'm doing in September, it's not hard. You were just all on Slack We've just all got a Slack, lighting, sound, video. When things come up, we mention it there. It doesn't take very much, but, you know, sharing information is never going to make things worse. And it almost always makes things better. So I think that's really the way forward.
Brilliant. And that was a fabulous segue into my thank you for joining Live Bytes, where we've been sharing information. So thank you. That was fairly good. I couldn't have planned that. But yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending and for joining us on the panel. It's really appreciated. We've had some great comments and feedback in the chat. I don't know if you've been keeping an eye on that, but everyone's been saying thank you very much and well done. So much appreciated. Have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you all again soon.